during our talk, if you would like to ask a question live, there's a microphone set up right up over here. Just go ahead and stand up next to it, and I'll recognize you, and you can ask your question at that point. So, I'm trying to decide whether or not how serious I want to be. So we'll start out completely serious. As a connoisseur of hamburgers, are veggie burgers proof that we live in a fallen world?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
I knew I liked him.
They're proof that hell exists, actually.
Feed the veggies to the cow, then make the burger. That's the proper order of things. Right. Okay, so this is when I put down some of my glasses. I have to keep everything at a distance. So first simple question. What is your least favorite area of science?
Wow. They're all cool, right? They're all cool. I don't know that I have a least favorite. I think maybe secular archaeology, because I love biblical archaeology, but secular archaeology, I'm like, yeah, I don't care too much about that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how much, especially Egyptology, how much they just absolutely will deny anything that has to do with biblical consistency.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did flat Earth theory come from, and does it have any scientific support?
To the latter, no. To the former, most of the pagan civilizations that were around the time of Scripture, up until about 500 BC, most pagan civilizations believed in a flat Earth. The Bible was the exception, because the Bible talks about a round Earth in places like Job 26:10, where it describes Earth's terminator as circular, and that only works on a sphere. So the Hebrews, at least those who had studied their Bible, were apparently aware that the Earth was spherical. The Greeks didn't figure that out until around 500 BC. Pythagoras believed the world was round, although his arguments for it are not recorded. Aristotle believed the Earth was round and made good arguments for it. He pointed out that lunar eclipses and the shadow of the Earth during a lunar eclipse is always circular. Then the modern flat Earth movement, and by the way, educated people have known throughout history that the world's round. The idea that Christopher Columbus was out to prove that it's round is a myth. Educated people knew that the world was round. He just thought it'd be faster to go that way, primarily because he'd misestimated the size of the Earth and also because he didn't know about the Americas. But I'm glad he made the trip. So there's that. The modern flat Earth movement, though, seems to have been started by critics of the Bible, who were trying to mock the Bible. And so they pulled verses out of context to say, see, the Bible teaches a flat Earth. Isn't that silly? Because we all know it's round. And it seems like some of the less educated Christians thought, oh, that's real. You know, that's really what the Bible says. It doesn't. We have a series of articles right now on the website, Pastor Jason Churchill wrote, that go through the hermeneutics of these passages that flat earthers twist out of context, and you really have to twist them out of context to get them to say that. So it seems to have been started by critics of Christianity, and then some well-intentioned but not so well-informed Christians latched onto it. And then with the advent of the internet, you know, there's all kinds of YouTube videos now. If you became a flat earther, it's because you saw a YouTube video of it. It's not because you did scholarly research or did some kind of experiment. You saw a YouTube video.
Man, just ruins everything. It's so much easier if it was all flat.
It would make the math a lot easier, I'll tell you that. Because you know, spherical trigonometry is kind of hard. I've done it because you have to do that to calculate stuff in space. If it was flat, it'd be much easier.
Well, math is in the axis of evil, so it all
hey now.
works out. Yep.
Hey now.
Yeah. Okay. So how do Christians today, because it is such a prevalent topic, and it's something that gets, unfortunately, people will bring an honest, you know, do you really think we landed on the moon and the Earth is round? And they tend to almost immediately get mocked. So as Christians, people who are honestly approaching us with these types of things, how would you recommend that gets approached in a way that is welcoming to the person bringing the question, but also informed enough to help lead them out of it?
I'm very happy to answer questions like that. When people sincerely have those questions, I kind of respect that. When they've gone through school system, you know, I went through the public school system, they taught me evolution, that turns out to be false. They also taught me the Earth is round. Is that false, Dr. Lisle? I'm happy to answer that. I'm happy to answer that. And there are a number of experiments you can do to test the shape of the Earth. It's not hard. I live in Colorado where we have these magnificent mountains, and where I'm living now, I'm living west of Pikes Peak. And so when the sun sets, the sun goes over the horizon, I can't see it anymore. Pikes Peak is still illuminated, and that's due to the curvature of the Earth. And you can actually see the shadow of Earth's curvature go up on Pikes Peak. It's magnificent. And you can even calculate the size of the Earth that way. If you're near the ocean, you can do that. If you're near the ocean, let's see, so we're on the East Coast, so at sunrise, you're watching the sunrise. Let's say let's see, I want to make sure I do this the right way. So you're standing up, and you see the first little bit of the sun rise. Lie down. You won't see it. And 7 seconds later, you'll see it rise again. And that's due to the curvature of the Earth. And that was one of the first questions that we solved when I was a freshman in physics. We had to calculate the size of the Earth based on the 7-second difference of when you're lying down versus when you're standing up. So it's pretty neat that you can do that kind of stuff. So I'm happy to answer those kind of questions. It's very easy to demonstrate the spherical nature of the Earth and even calculate its size. And I'm happy to go through the hermeneutics of it as well. And yes, we did land on the moon. We left reflectors on the moon when we landed there. And I haven't done this myself, but I've had colleagues you can take and bounce a laser off those reflectors and time the difference, and you'll get about 3 seconds, because that's how long it takes for a laser beam to go to the moon and back. It's proof that we were there, because we left those reflectors there. So yeah.
Now, if I'm remembering correctly, they also help measure the speed of the moon's
recession. Yep.
Recession.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's true.
The moon is slowly moving away from us, very, very, very slowly. Now, that sometimes is used by the evolutionary community to try to prove, like, the moon was actually born out of the Earth. But unfortunately, the math on that doesn't work, does it?
Right, yeah. So I don't think an informed evolutionist would make that argument. Uninformed ones might. But yeah, the rate at which it's moving, today it's about 1.5 inches a year. So you run it back to 6,000 years ago, it turns out it was 750 feet closer at creation, which is not a big deal because it's 240,000 miles away. So what's 750 feet among friends? But if you run it back billions of years, and you have to account for the fact that if it's closer, the rate would be different, because you have to use calculus to do it right. But I actually show you how to do that in the book Taking Back Astronomy, how to calculate that. And it turns out the Earth and Moon would have been in the same place at 1.45 billion years in a hypothetical past. So that's a long time. Yes, but in the secular worldview, they're supposed to be 4.5 billion years old. But they can't be older than 1.45 billion years old, because they'd be in the same place at the same time. And even before that happened, the tidal forces would be so great it would rip the moon apart, and you'd have tides sweeping over the continents every day. So it puts a maximum age on the Earth-Moon that's much less than the secular age. It's a problem in the secular worldview.
That's awesome. Okay, with talking about age, how is the age of the universe worked out in secular science? Where'd this number 13 point something billion years come from?
It comes from the assumption that the universe started in a Big Bang, and by measuring the expansion rate, assuming that it's the fabric of space that's expanding, how long would it take before all the fabric of space is contained in a point? And you work it out using what's called the Hubble constant, and it's basically, as an approximation, it's just simply the inverse of the Hubble constant. That gives you the age of the universe, assuming the Big Bang is true. But we just saw evidence that the fabric of space isn't expanding at all. So that's gone now. That's all gone.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It was really kind of the secular world to fund that really intensive creationist project, the James Webb Telescope. It's really great of them to do
Is your
that.
tax dollars? You all funded it, so I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in relation to that, so this question states, I read about cosmic microwave radiation, and many believe that radiation came from the Big Bang. Is this true? And if not, what is this radiation? Where did it come from? And how did it come into existence?
Okay. Yeah, so just for the sake of everybody who's thinking about this, if you could see microwaves, you could go outside on a clear night and the sky would be glowing with microwaves. It'd be bright. And they're coming from all directions in space, and they correspond to a temperature of about 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. So it indicates the source of it's very, very cold, whatever it is. The assumption has been, well, that's the leftover radiation that the Big Bang made when it happened, and because it's been stretched thousands of times, it's been stretched all the way into microwaves. It's been redshifted. That's an assumption, though. We don't know that it's been redshifted at all. Could be, but it doesn't have to be. So is it the leftover radiation of the Big Bang? No, because the Big Bang's out now. The Big Bang requires the stretching of the fabric of space, and there's good evidence that the fabric of space is not expanding. The sizes of galaxies are consistent with them simply moving through space. So it's not the Big Bang's leftover radiation. Furthermore, the Big Bang predicted variations in that microwave background radiation, hot spots and cold spots, spots that are a little warmer than 2.7, spots that are a little cooler than that. And although there are variations, they're 10 times smaller than what the Big Bang predicted. The variations are much smaller. And that's a problem because they needed those variations to act as seeds for galaxies to start to form around those. So there's good evidence that the cosmic microwave background is not leftover radiation from the Big Bang. Very good evidence for that. As to what it is, we don't know. And I've speculated it could be the light that God used for the first 3 days before he made the sun, but then he stretched out that light to microwaves, but I don't know that that's right. It could be that there's something in between the galaxies that creates those microwaves that we haven't discovered yet. There's some evidence that these microwaves are not entirely beyond the farthest galaxies, but are kind of in between them. Because the microwaves, as they go through galaxies, it should create a kind of a shadow. And we found that it doesn't. It's called the Sunyaev-Zoldovich effect, and it should be 4 times stronger than it is. And we don't see that effect, not nearly as strong. And so that suggests the microwaves could be in between the galaxies rather than a background. It might be a foreground. So that's kind of exciting. We don't know what it is. And sometimes there's a tendency, it's human nature to jump on something if there is an explanation, right? And we don't have one at the moment. The creationists don't. But in the next 10 years, we might. The rate at which creation cosmology is developing now with the latest James Webb Space Telescope images, we might discover what's causing it in the next 10 years or so. It's entirely possible, but I won't give you any false pretenses. We don't know what it is at the moment. We don't know what's causing it. We know what it is. We don't know what's causing it.
Awesome. Kind of related to that, for a few years there's been a lot of discussion about dark energy, dark matter. Is this a theoretical concept? Has this actually been discovered? And how important is it to secular cosmology? Okay,
let's separate the two, because I have a lot more confidence in dark matter than dark energy. Dark matter is anything that we can't see, but gives away its existence by pulling gravitationally on something that we can see. And so, for example, the rate at which stars orbit in a galaxy, we can measure that from their Doppler shift. We can see how fast the stars are moving. And we can calculate the mass that's interior to that, or at least estimate it, because we can see the stars interior to that, and gas and dust. And we find that the stars are moving much too fast if the gas and dust and the other stars are the only mass interior to that. There has to be a lot more mass there than what we can see. But we don't know what this extra mass is. So it's basically mass. We can't see it, but we know it's there because it's pulling on something we can see. And I think there's very compelling evidence for that. The speed at which stars orbit. Also, when light from a distant galaxy goes past a nearby galaxy, it gets bent. It's called gravitational lensing. In fact, the James Webb Space Telescope, some of those galaxies were lensed. They look a little distorted because it acts like a weird magnifying glass. But you can calculate the mass of that galaxy based on the bending of the light, and lo and behold, the mass is about 10 times what you can account for by simply the stars and the dust and the gas. And so that suggests that about 90% of the mass in the universe we haven't discovered yet. We know it's there because it's pulling on stuff we can see, but we don't know what it is. Really cool. I think that's exciting. I think it's fun to have some unknowns in science. There's still things left to discover. We don't know what that is. The only alternative to dark matter is that our formula for gravity is wrong. But our formula for gravity has been so successful in predicting the motions of planets and everything else in the universe. We think that's probably right, and it's simply there's unaccounted for mass out there that we don't know what it is. Dark energy is a little different. Dark energy would give a little bit of mass to empty space. It would say, because space is not nothing, space is something, and it could have a little bit of mass to it. And I won't go to the details, but the effect of that is it would create a kind of a pressure that would tend to push space apart. And there is the evidence for that is entirely based on the departure of the Hubble law from a straight line as you go out further into space. But it turns out this new Doppler model that I proposed eliminates the need for dark energy. So there's no need for it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying there is no longer any evidence for it because that was required to fix the data to make it line up with the curve. But if the galaxies are simply moving through space, you don't need that fix. So dark energy may not exist.
Just talk about space, just space for a minute, and things that are taught on a regular basis that haven't actually been discovered, but we're firmly committed to that they actually exist. You talk about the Oort cloud quite often, how this is just amazing thing that no one has ever discovered that is responsible for so many things that we have discovered. What's with that?
Yeah, it's basically the fact that comets can't last billions of years, and we have them. Comets are these basically icy dirt balls out in space, or dirty ice balls if you prefer, and they orbit around the sun in elliptical paths, and when they're far away, that ice remains frozen, but when they come close to the sun, the heat and radiation from the sun vaporizes that ice, and that's what forms a comet's tail. The comet's tail is material being depleted away from the nucleus of the comet. That's why they have that shape. And in fact, in the next few weeks, you might see a comet in the western sky. There's a fairly bright comet that's come out. May or may not be naked eye, but you can see it in binoculars. And every time you see a comet, it's getting smaller. It's losing mass. And we can calculate the rate at which the material is being depleted, and it's quite high. We know the amount of material that's there. A typical comet nucleus is a few miles across. The largest one we've ever seen, Hale-Bopp, is 40 miles across. That's big. But it's not that big. And so after millions of years, all the material would be gone. A typical comet can last no more than about 100,000 years. But why do we still have comets? That's the problem. It's a problem for secularists. For creationists, it's like, well, we'd expect that because the solar system's not 100,000 years old yet, so we still have some comets around. But in the secular view, the comets should be gone. So you need a comet generator to make new comets. And that's what the Oort cloud is. It's basically the hypothetical idea that out beyond the farthest planets, where we can't detect it because they're too far away, there are trillions of potential comets orbiting kind of in a spherical cloud. And every now and then, one of them's kicked into the inner solar system to become a brand new comet. So as the old comets disintegrate, new ones replace them. The Oort cloud is entirely invented to try and rescue the billions of years from the fact that we still have comets. It's a comet generator. There's no evidence for it.
But yet, people have done their
Oh, yeah.
PhD thesis on the Oort cloud, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, you'll find it in your textbook, but you won't find it in your telescope.
Yeah.
That says it all, doesn't it?
Tempted to make a political joke, but I'm not gonna. So speaking about things in regard to the solar system. Why does one of our planets spin backwards?
Yeah, or two, depending on if you count the planet Uranus. Uranus is kind of on its side, but it's a little more than 90 degrees, so you could call it backwards too. Venus is exactly the opposite. And you wouldn't expect that if the solar system, if the secular view of the solar system were right. You'd expect all the planets to be spinning the same way because it supposedly collapsed from a nebula, and the planets are kind of the leftover dust that collected. But there's a principle called conservation of angular momentum that should cause everything to continue to spin that same way. But Venus is exactly the opposite. Venus turns exactly the opposite direction. So the sun would rise in the west on Venus and set in the east. It's the opposite of the Earth. So that'd be something to see. Although it's permanently overcast, so you'd never see it.
But it orbits in the same.
It orbits the same way as all the other planets, and that I think is a design feature because the planets are fairly large and they pass each other every now and then, and they need to be kind of organized in the same plane and in the same direction so that the gravity of one doesn't kick out another planet. It would be unstable. If some planets orbited back, if they got too close to another planet, they could eject it. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they orbit in the same direction, I think, is a design feature. But rotation doesn't matter so much. Why does Venus rotate backwards? I think God did that just to confuse the secularists. There's no other reason for it. It just shows his creative diversity, but there's no logical need for it.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering correctly, the fact that it orbits in the wrong that it rotates in the wrong direction is amplified because it's a gas giant.
You're thinking of Uranus. Uranus is tilted on its side.
Yeah.
And it's a gas or ice giant. That's difficult to explain. Or Saturn. Saturn's tilted 26 degrees, and it shouldn't be. I think it's 26 degrees. It shouldn't be, because it should be upright like that, but it is a gas giant. And so the idea, well, something hit it. You can't really hit it. It's a ball of gas. So
big enough to hit a plate.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Just because it can, why not? That sounds like a great reason. Speaking of planets, how many planets have been discovered, and what makes a planet a planet? What's the difference between a planet and a moon, or just a big rock floating through space.
Okay, there's some controversy about that, but basically a planet is any large object that orbits the sun or a star directly and not another object that's orbiting that star, big enough to be round and big enough to have cleared out its orbit, so there are not similar sized objects in the same orbit. That's a new criteria that was added in 2006, I think. In what we were asking about.
So how many planets
How many are there?
have been discovered? Yeah.
Okay, in our solar system there's 8, but we now have found planets in other solar systems, and the current number, it's over 5,000. I haven't kept up. I mean, there may be more than that, but it's at least 5,000 planets that have been discovered among other stars. Usually the way they're discovered, because they're so far away, they're orbiting so close to their star, you can't see them directly. Only a few have been directly seen, and there have been some that have been directly imaged, which is amazing.
Oh, it's awesome.
Oh yeah, there's one solar system that has 4 planets orbiting it, and they've taken time-lapse pictures over time. You can watch them orbit this other star. It's amazing. But most of them are indirectly discovered when they cross in front of their star from our point, and the star's light drops a little bit. And there's a mission called the Kepler mission that discovers. I was able to find one that way, actually, using Kepler data. It's pretty neat. So most of them have been found indirectly. But that only works for the ones that are edge-on relative to us. So think of all the ones that are tilted, where the planets never cross in front of their star. Those remain undiscovered.
Now, I can't remember who it was, but how was Earth described as just a kind of like a plain planet orbiting a plain star, and there's hundreds of billions of them in the galaxy, and we should find Earths all over the place. Now, why is that not the case? What is it that makes our planet special in its position within our solar system? Why are we habitable and Mars not?
Yeah, so we're at the right distance from the sun for water to be in a liquid state, and we have sufficient atmosphere for water to be in a liquid state. Of course, it can be frozen or vapor as well. It can be in all 3 states, but the majority of water on Earth, liquid. As far as we know, life requires that. So that's the design. There's all kinds of design features that the Earth requires to make it livable. That's just one. Its distance from the sun. The orbit's fairly circular. We are a little closer to the sun. We're actually closer in winter, farther in summer. That confuses some people. But it only varies by, the average distance is 93 million miles, and it varies by a couple million miles one way or the other. So it doesn't have a crazy orbit. Like Mercury comes much closer to the sun sometimes and much further away. So right distance from the sun to receive the right amount of heat and light. So that's unusual.
What's the distance if the Earth were to move? What's the distance that we are no longer capable of sustaining life, either forward or backwards?
Okay, that's it's debated, but the best numbers I've been able to find is if you move it 5% closer, life wouldn't be possible. Or if you move it, you can move it a bit further. You can move it maybe 37% further away. Those are the numbers that I've seen. It's hard to calculate that because we don't. Weather is complicated. The way the sun influences weather, there's a feedback mechanism. So, but somewhere around there. Some people have said, well, you move it 1 mile closer. And you could move it a mile closer. That's okay. Yeah. It's about 5% closer, 37% further out.
Wow. So this really is very specifically and strategically placed.
It is.
For us to be here.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. So hard to call it an accident. Let's see. I'm trying to stay on the same basic pattern here. Okay, along with the Earth, why is it that some pictures of the Earth from space have no stars in the background, but others do?
Yeah, most of them won't, because especially if you're looking at the sun-facing side of the Earth, the day side, you're not going to see stars because of contrast. The Earth is very reflective. It reflects a lot of the sunlight. Same reason you don't see stars during the day. You can, if you know right where to look. And with a telescope, you can see stars in the day. I've done it. But you have to know right where to look, and it's hard to make them out because of the blue. So, so only the brighter stars, and only if you increase the contrast. But I've done that. I've taken images of the Earth and ramped up the contrast to the Earth as a bright, sphere. You can't see any detail anymore. It just looks white, and you can start to see some of the stars in the background. It's basically the Earth is much brighter than those stars. It's a contrast issue. At night, they're a little easier to see. I've seen pictures of the night side of the Earth, and then you can see the stars.
Awesome. Okay, this one's a little bit more sciencey. What is the difference between fusion and fission, and will this ever become a useful power source?
Okay, so fusion, bringing elements together, fission, breaking elements apart. Fission is already used as a power source. There was a nuclear reactor when I was in I think in Florence, when I was in Kentucky, that's a nuclear reactor that powers that, so it's used for electricity. So there's certain elements that are conducive to fission. Tends to be the heavier elements that can undergo fission. So you break them apart and they release energy. It tends to be the lighter elements that can be fused, and they'll release energy. If you fuse heavier elements, they absorb energy. They don't release it. And likewise with the lighter elements. If you break them apart, it takes energy rather than creating energy. So you want to fuse elements lighter than iron. You can fuse them and get energy. Elements heavier than iron, you can undergo fission to get energy. So fission's already a useful power source. Will fusion ever be a useful power source? I don't know. I have a book in my collection of graduate school books called Plasma Physics and Controlled Fusion, Part 1. It was written in the 70s. And the author obviously expected in the next decade that they would perfect controlled fusion, which of course they never have. So they never wrote a Part 2. But so that remains elusive. It's not impossible, but it's currently beyond our technology.
Hopefully he got the grant money for the second part before he
Sure.
finished it. Yeah, that would be okay, what are your thoughts on AI?
Yeah, so it has power. It can be used for good. It's like anything else. It's like the internet. The internet's an amazing thing. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It can be used to promote. The internet can be used to promote Bible literature. It can be used for pornography. It can be used. AI is the same way. It's a new tool that we have. It's kind of amazing what it can do. I have been known to, on occasion, record certain movies and edit them for language. And not for profit or anything. I'm not trying to make a buck off of it. But with AI, it's easy to do that. You can not only make the language, you can make people say things that they haven't actually said using their voice. It's amazing what you can do. But that could be used for evil as well. You could very easily make a video of someone these days using AI that makes them look like they're doing something they're not doing. So it needs to be used very carefully. It's AI, it's artificial intelligence. It's something that looks like there's a mind behind it, but there isn't. And so if you're concerned about AI taking over the world, that'll never happen. Computers cannot think. They cannot think. All they do is follow the instructions of their programmer. You got to be concerned about what the programmer is doing. That's the key.
So Terminator not really
Not going to happen.
Okay, so I just thinking about that. So one of the things about the James Webb Telescope, one of the other questions was, what happens when the James Webb Telescope runs out of fuel?
Well, it has thrusters that keep it in that orbit, so it'll drift out of the L2 point. It won't be usable anymore at that point.
Yeah, and I read a little article on AI, and they were kind of referencing the telescope, and this was people who are not involved in astronomy, and they were talking about because of the distance and the time delay in any commands versus their execution to do any repairs out there, it would have to be automated, that AI may at some point in time be able to head out that way, diagnose a problem, fix it, and do you ever think that it would get in that way? Because it would have to actually diagnose the problem, think about the solution, run through the possible consequences of this action or that action, and it's almost in an autonomous way. It's kind of interesting how that could happen. But do you ever see that application on that level?
Maybe, but just keep in mind it can't actually think. There's no actual thought process. There's no consciousness. There's no awareness. It will do what it's programmed to do. And I'm amazed at basically AI uses math and then scours the internet and takes information that's already out there and combines it in new ways. And I think it's amazing what it can do. I've been very impressed, but it cannot think. When the first time I was really impressed with AI, it was when they did the Jeopardy show. Did you see the Jeopardy show against Watson? They had the computer Watson against the two competitors. One of them was what was his name? Ken Jennings. Thank you, Ken
Nerds.
Jennings. Yeah, Ken Jennings. I don't normally watch Jeopardy because it makes me feel stupid. But there was Ken, because I'm not good at trivia. There was Ken Jennings there and Watson, and then another contestant, and the computer blew him away. I mean, it was amazing. But there were a couple of questions it got wrong that no human would have missed, and it shows that you can tell it's not thinking. It has no awareness. It's searching the internet, and it's got a neat program that allows it to say, what is such and such? And normally it gets it right. But there were a couple questions that you could tell there's nobody home in there. There's nobody home. There's no mind.
Yeah. asking ChatGPT to draw you something beautiful. Let's see what happens. Okay, so let's see. This one came from YouTube. Many intelligent design scientists believe in an old Earth. This is based on a difference in the past tense language in Genesis, between Genesis 1 verses 1 and 2 and Genesis 1 verse 3. Is there an uncertain length of time that can be inserted between Genesis 1 and 2 and 1 3?
Good question. Thomas Chalmers had invented the idea back in 1804 that you could insert a gap of time between verse 1 and verse 2 in Genesis, and he did that with the intention of trying to allow for the millions of years. Millions of years was becoming really popular. It was really in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and it was becoming a stumbling block because people knew the Bible doesn't say that. And so Thomas Chalmers, with the best of intentions, invented this gap theory that you could insert time between Genesis 1 and 1 and 1 2. But he was not apparently familiar with the Hebrew language because you cannot do that in Hebrew. Genesis 1 2 uses a Hebrew grammatical construction called a vav disjunctive. And that in English is where you have and, the word and, followed by a non-verb. And the earth. Earth is not a verb, it is a noun, right? When you have that in Hebrew, in English we don't like to start sentences with and, but in Hebrew they love to do it. And when you have and followed by a non-verb, it's a vav disjunctive, and that basically indicates that that verse is a comment or clarification of what came previously. What came previously? In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth, right? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ba'et haaretz. Verse 2, ba'haaretz, and the earth. That indicates that is a clarification of verse 1. And so my point is you can't put a gap of time between verse 1 and verse 2 because verse 2 doesn't follow in time. Verse 2 is not what happens next. Verse 2 is explaining verse 1. Because if you didn't have verse 2, if you just had verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, you might think, oh, he made it like it is today, full of people, continents separated from ocean, plants, animals. Verse 2 is clarifying. No, when God first made the heaven and the earth, it didn't have the shape it has today. It wasn't full of life. It was formless and empty. And then God spends the rest of the creation week forming it and filling it. So you cannot put a gap of time between verse 1 and verse 2. It doesn't work because of that vav disjunctive. The rest of Genesis is vav consecutive. That does follow in time, but there's no gaps. And Exodus 20:11 kind of eliminates that. Exodus 20:11, in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. So that eliminates any possibility of gaps. So there's no doubt on the basis of Scripture that the millions of years is not possible.
When I was taking taking a course in Hebrew from an Israeli university, the lady doing the course, so we went through biblical Hebrew, and they use Genesis for it because it's the easiest for people to understand, and it's usually the most controversial as you're walking through it. We had a ton of fun with it, and she was not a religious Jew. She was a national Jew, and so she had no religious connection to the book at all. So she was very, very plain in a lot of things, and she did not care for people translating this, and she specifically would mention putting in gaps of time. Mm. And one of the things that they mentioned, when we translate Hebrew, we have to insert words. Things that are one word in Hebrew a lot of times require multiple words for English. And Genesis, when you look at the Old Testament, the names of the books of the Old Testament are typically the first word in the first paragraph or first sentence of the book. That's where the names typically come from. So Genesis is actually a translation of the first word in the book of Genesis, which is Bereshit, which we translate in the beginning. But a lot of Hebrews translate it at the start of all things. Think about that for a second. At the start of all things, God created the heavens and the earth, and they were void, and they were formless. Boy, doesn't that change try to put an indefinite period of time at the beginning of that. You can't. It's written to be beautiful and immovable at the same time. It's really amazing. But the more you get into the language, the more you realize that we butcher it. We butcher it to put our ideas into the text, and that's an unfortunate thing. So let's see. Last question, because we're moving along here, and I don't want to. I scheduled 6 hours for this, so we're coming up on that. So we're doing really well. So last question, and this comes. A few people have asked about this. Stars. Have we ever seen a star form? And do we even know how they're made?
We've never seen a star form. When secularists say this is a star-forming region, What they mean is we find lots of hot blue stars, and we know those can't last millions of years. So they must have formed recently. So this must be a star-forming region. But no one's ever seen a star form. How do they form? Biblically, they were spoken into existence by God. He made the stars also. That's on day 4 of the creation week when he makes the luminaries, and he specifically indicates the stars also. That's connected back to the Hebrew word for make, and with the et, so that we know that he made them. It's not just that they appeared. There's a different Hebrew word for that. He made them on day 4. As far as I know, there's no natural process that would form a star. Now I got to be careful here because a star is not a living creature. A star is a ball of gas, and so I'm intellectually open to the possibility that a ball of gas could form in space.
I've been called the same thing.
But we've never seen it. We've never seen it, and there are physics problems getting a star to form because gas in space wants to expand. You know that gas wants to fill its container. You didn't hold your breath when you came into this room, just in case all the air went to that corner. You assumed that it would spread out. Gas does that. It does that in space too. Theoretically, gravity could at some point overcome gas pressure and pull it together, but we don't know of any situations in space where that's happened. Normally, the outward force of gas pressure is much greater than the meager inward force of gravity, like in a nebula. Secularists believe stars form from a nebula collapsing in on itself, but the outward force of gas pressure is always bigger than the inward force of gravity. And even if you could get it started, angular momentum would tend to prevent further collapse. Like if you've ever been spinning and you pull the weights in, it's hard because of conservation of angular momentum. And then also the third force that tends to prevent any further collapse would be the magnetic fields. Magnetic fields, when you push them together, it's like pushing the north end of a magnet to another north end of a magnet. They don't want to go. And so to collapse a star that way, there are 3 things that would tend to prevent it: gas pressure, conservation of angular momentum, and magnetic fields. And so I'm reasonably confident that stars do not form and cannot form. They had to have been made initially by God. Once you make a star, its own gravity will hold it together. That's not a problem. That's God holding it together by natural mechanisms. But the only way to make one, I believe, is supernaturally. Yeah. I wouldn't be dogmatic about that, but I'm fairly confident about that.
2 names that come to mind there. One of the questions that came up was someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is all over TV and absolutely certain that we have all this figured out and we know exactly how stars are made. And on a secularist view, you would expect that. But on our side, you have Hugh Ross making very similar claims, supporting these old Earth, long age views and trying to roll evolution into the Bible. How do we balance that? What do you do with someone who you're trying to witness to in church, but they're a Neil deGrasse Tyson fan, and then they throw Hugh Ross in your face? Well, see, there's other Christians, scientists, that they don't believe that nonsense in the Bible either.
Well, they should.
Yes, they should.
They need to repent, and they need to trust in the Bible. And
You debated Hugh Ross.
I've debated Hugh Ross
Yeah.
more than once. And you can find the latest one on my website where I kind of analyzed my own debate because I thought, there's a few places I could have said that better. So I criticized myself too. I said I should have said this here, but we have that on the website. If you go to our videos, you can see that debate in multiple parts. Hugh Ross is very badly mistaken, especially when it comes to scriptures. He tends to repeat the secular story, and then he tries to read the Bible to accommodate the secular story. That's what he does. And you'll always find people that are wanting to do that. That's a common theme. It was common in Israel. You didn't want to reject Yahweh. They just wanted to add him to the other gods. They wanted to serve God and Baal. And that's common today. We want to serve God and we want to allow them millions of years. They're not compatible. The biblical God is not a clumsy ogre who created over billions of years. He created very deliberately in 6 days and rested a day as a pattern for us. The Bible's clear about that in Exodus 20. Take a look at my debates with Hugh Ross to see how I would answer him. I would be very happy to debate Neil deGrasse Tyson. I kind of like the guy. I would like to meet him and debate him. I think that would be a lot of fun. He probably wouldn't do it, but I think that would be a lot of fun. I don't think that his position is rational when it comes to origins. Now, when it comes to operational science, we more or less agree on things, how the universe works today, but how it came into existence, we disagree with that. And that's not for scientific reasons. It's because he has a secular philosophy that I don't think can withstand rational scrutiny.
Yeah. Now, Terry Mortensen just debated Hugh Ross at a university, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's available online. they're debating specifically the importance of the age of the Earth and how long ages create very difficult problems for the biblical worldview. So, do you remember what university that was?
I think it's Southern Evangelical.
Frank Turek was the moderator.
Oh, but it
Yeah.
has to be Southern Evangelical.
Yeah.
I debated UROS there one time too, and Terry reached out to me before that happened, and we just via email chatted a little bit. Terry's a good Bible scholar. I'm sure that he did very well in that. I haven't seen the debate yet because it just happened. It happened like just a few days ago. Yeah. So I haven't seen it yet, but I'm confident that Terry would. I'm confident he did a good job with that.
Yeah. While I was down at the pastors' conference, he gave us a little preview of the material he was bringing to the debate. It was pretty cool. Yeah, it was just a lot of fun. Well, did anyone have a? Okay, what you got?
All right, so we got a couple of questions from online. Would this non-expanding universe model without a Big Bang be cause for atheists to hold to an eternal universe since there was no Big Bang beginning?
In terms of the expansion, they could try that. The problem with that is entropy. Energy, there's a law of thermodynamics, the second law, that says that energy always goes from a useful state to a less useful state. And the fact that there is still useful energy in the universe means it cannot be infinitely old. So they might try that. If it was just for expansion, they could try that. But because of the second law of thermodynamics, that will not work.
Is global warming, or can global warming truly be blamed on human negligence?
Probably not. It is possible that a small fraction of it is due to human pollution and so on. But a lot of people assume, well, we're putting out all this carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is a mild greenhouse gas. And nature puts out a lot more carbon dioxide than we do. One volcano goes off, it puts off all kinds of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the Earth doesn't just catastrophically run away. So I don't think that human beings are a major factor. We could be a minor factor. That's possible. But furthermore, the times when human beings are putting out the most carbon dioxide do not correlate with the Earth's temperatures being warmer. So there's a cause and effect problem there. So I don't think I think there's good evidence that climate change, which does happen, we think the Earth was quite different before the flood, and shortly after the flood we had an ice age caused by the flood. And those are part of the cycles that happen now are part of natural cycles. They probably have far more to do with the sun than anything that happens on the Earth. The sun goes through cycles, and it puts out a little more energy. That affects Earth's temperature more than anything we can do. But water vapor is far more effective greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So why are we not banning people from boiling a pot of water? But we got to reduce your carbon footprint. Not really. And we need to remember too, and this is important, we have a promise from God that catastrophic climate change cannot happen as long as the Earth remains. Because according to Genesis 8:22, God promised the basic cycles of nature, including the seasons, seed time and harvest, will remain as long as the Earth does. And so that prevents any kind of catastrophic global warming that would prevent seed time and harvest. The Bible says that can't happen until Judgment Day, and then there's no preventing that global warming.
And I had one of my own. When you were covering the James Webb Telescope, you kept mentioning that you believed that we're seeing those distant galaxies in those parts of space as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that mesh with the speed of light and the time shift that would cause viewing something so far away?
Yeah, it's hard to give a sort of I'm still working on my elevator talk for that. But the bottom line is when we talk about the speed of light, we're talking about the average speed there and back and taking the average of that. Let's say we have a mirror 1 light second out in space, and I shoot a laser out, bring it back. I will see the reflection 2 seconds later. Most people assume it takes 1 second to go out and 1 second to come back. But Einstein discovered not only do we not know that, we can't know that. The speed of light in one direction is something that cannot be measured without tacitly assuming it in the first place. What we normally do is we say, okay, I'm just going to define the speed of light to be the same that way as this way. And you can do that, and the math works out. You could also define the speed of light to be infinitely fast toward me and half c out, and that works too. All the physics of Einstein, that Einstein discovered, all the physics that we know of, is independent of the one-way speed of light. And that has to do with the fact that we have different definitions for what now means in distant space. There's a relativity of simultaneity that Einstein talks about. This is all covered in my book, The Physics of Einstein, but the bottom line is light can reach us immediately now because the speed of light in one direction, we get to stipulate that. And the Bible apparently defines it as being infinite when it's toward an observer and half c when it's away. And there's nothing in physics that says that you can't do it that way. It's less convenient, perhaps, than making it the same speed in both directions because that makes the math easier. But there's nothing that says you can't define it to be instantaneous when it's moving toward an observer. And the Bible apparently uses that standard because when God makes the luminaries to give light upon the earth, he says, and it was so, indicating he made the luminaries and they immediately gave light on the earth. So I don't think it took any time for the light to reach the earth. The light genuinely came from the star. God didn't make it en route. It came from the star, but it reached earth immediately due to the way we define now in space. I'm getting better at my elevator pitch. I think it's kind of complicated, but that's the best I can do.
It's a 10-story elevator ride, but it was good.
Yeah,
It was
okay,
very
yeah,
good.
good. Yeah, it's the
Yes.
penthouse suite, but we
Yeah.
made it.
So last question, and this is just a little bit outside of the topic. Given the time we live in, the societal difficulties that we live in, and the influence on young people through the ever-changing public school curriculums, what would be your advice to parents, especially parents here tonight, especially parents who are not homeschooling, to help prepare their children to combat the forces that are inevitably coming their way?
I would highly encourage you to consider homeschooling. I highly recommend it. I go different places. I've seen the results. And if you homeschool, your kids will be like you. If you're a weirdo, they'll be weirdos. But if you're a solid Christian, they'll be solid Christians. I've seen that. And I can usually tell when I'm talking with a homeschooler because they're just so much smarter. And I say this as a student who went through the public school system. I'm a little envious that I wasn't homeschooled. But of course, nobody did it back in my time. But nonetheless, I would highly encourage you to homeschool. If you can't do that, get them into a good Christian school. Public schools, they were bad when I was in them, and they're so much worse now. They're so much worse now. I would almost say, don't even consider that an option. And I know, you say, well, it's free. I know, and it's unfair that your tax money is being used for that, whether you like it or not. It's unfair. It's not right. But I've got some articles on this on the website, on biblical principles of education. The Bible does have something to say about how children should be educated. And you can, if I'm wrong, you email in, and I'll try to answer you if I can. I want to be pointed out if I'm wrong. But I think the Bible highly encourages homeschooling. I think it allows for delegation, but it should be to a Christian system. That's the best way to do it. Don't send your kids through a public school system. 4 out of 5 will not be in the church when they're in their 20s if you do that. 4 out of 5.
Yeah. Currently in New York, they have been. This has been going on for a long time. They never actually been able to make it happen. There's continuous legislation to outlaw homeschooling, or to regulate it at the state level, where you're forced to use specific curriculums, or you could lose custody of your kids. And that's kind of where New York is headed. What about, let's say that goes through. You don't have a choice. Public school is the only answer. What do they do then?
Move to Florida. That's what I do.
That is fantastic. We just left.
I would not send I don't have kids, but if I had kids, I would not send them to public school under any circumstances. That's just my view.
Well,
I've seen the results of it, guys. I've visited. I can't tell you how many sad stories. I'm like, my kids, they're not in church anymore. They don't want anything to do with it. Well, you send them to public school. They were trained to think about everything from a non-Christian perspective. It's not surprising. 4 out of 5 is the current statistic. 4 out of 5 students that graduate that are in the church that graduate from a public school will not be in the church when they're in their 20s.
and that transition away from the church begins somewhere around middle school, right?
Yeah.
Beginning of evolutionary biology.
Yeah, but you don't see the result of it until they're in their 20s. You
Yeah.
might think, our kids are in high school, they're doing well. They've already got the seeds planted, but they still want to please their parents at that point, and so they're still going to church. But the doubts are there. They're not really in the church. They're going to church. They're not really in the church. And when they're in their 20s and they're away from their parents, I don't need to please mom and dad anymore. And why am I going to church anymore anyway? I never really believed in that stuff. That's what happens.
Yeah, that's difficult. It's humbling. definitely shows you the level of determination our enemy has against our fruitfulness and our growth in the Lord. Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you very much for being here. We really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
I may have gone slightly over where I intended to stop, but you stayed, so deal with it. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. Can we just give a round of applause to Dr. Lau
Thank you.
for coming up? And if you wanted to meet him or have him sign one of your books, now is the only time you have left to make that happen. Because in a little bit, you want to go grab something?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, then I got to feed him. So we're gonna go do that. So if you're gonna do that, please don't hem and haw. Make it happen. Thank you again. Lord bless you. Have a fantastic night. We'll see you next time we do something like this.